Well, congratulations you all. You got to the afternoon. Well done. Hope it's been a fantastic morning and post-lunch series of talks you've been to. The ones I got to were fantastic. Now, this afternoon, first of all, before we get to this afternoon, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do. The list is quite long. I'll go quickly through it. Now, apparently not everyone realised this is a program that pulls out. Just letting you know. A lot of work went into it. Thank you, Barbara. Beautiful. I think, congratulations to Barbara Hoffman, her clever ideas. At all times, you'll know where you are with that program. The program also lists the archives and manuscript session this afternoon. That was a late entry to the program, and it's at 5:30, basically after this session here, for those who are interested. Kylie Percival will be chairing. It's for those who want to think about future paths for archives and manuscript, okay? So just stay in this room. Now, those who are going on the heritage walk to, or tour of the Whitlam Institute, I'll be leaving here at 5:45 from the foyer, time enough to change shoes and get yourself ready. It's a half-hour walk. There are buses and things like that. I can't remember any of those details. Peter Alphanis can tell us if we need to know. Go to the registration desk. You should have got an email if you were booked for that tour. Otherwise, we'll walk up there. It's up near University of Western Sydney. There were a few late entrants to that. Look, you can probably pay your $15 directly to me if you want, or we can work it out later. That's money that's going to the Whitlam Institute. Social dinners, 6:30 p.m. You will have put your names down. Jenny's made the bookings. Yes, Jenny? Okay, so first point to note is that those who had booked to go to the Emporium, they didn't want us. They heard we were archivists and that's it. The booking was cancelled. I don't know. Anyway, you're now going to Cretini's. But Jenny has just said you're also going to eat early. It's all right. It's a lovely night. Be fine. Take that outside. At least they're welcoming, right? So is that for both tables, Jenny? Both tables. Okay. So otherwise, 6:30 at your restaurant. If you're unsure, if you can't remember what you've done, go and see the registration desk after this session, okay? Or see Jenny. Actually, don't do it. Just go and see Jenny. She knows. Australian Museum Tour. That is still on if you're interested, but Trish needs to know by this afternoon. You can come and put your name down either directly with me or at the registration desk, but really you want to have that sorted by this afternoon, is that right? Fantastic if you're in town that morning. Yeah, I think that's it. That's good. All right. Now, so getting on to our first session for this afternoon, I'd like to introduce you to Jared Ackenhead, who's the Senior Manager of Content Acquisition for Ancestry and has been with the company for 5 years. His responsibilities have included the acquisition of records for Eastern United States and Canada. During his 5 years, he's developed many strategic partnerships that have led to the acquisition and digitisation of millions of records. He currently resides in the US, but has lived in many parts of the world, including Queensland, Australia. So join me in welcoming Jared to the stage to talk about Ancestry.
Thank you, Julia. I usually, when I give these little speeches, introductions, I'm usually the one with the accent, but it's good to be home. Like my bio said, I lived in Queensland for quite a long time and immigrated to the USA, and so I'm grateful to be home. I didn't realise how much I'd miss meat pies and sausage rolls, so I'm appreciative of the meals that you guys have put on. And so I'm just here. First of all, I wanted to thank ASA for the opportunity that they've given us over the number of years for us to be associated and sponsor this event. As Ancestry, archives are extremely important to us, and that's kind of why we're here, as partly to recognize the relationships that we have with archives around the world. And the reason we're so embedded within that community is because the type of records that we have on Ancestry typically come from the archive community, those records that are important to family history research. So as my bio and as Julia had mentioned, I'm responsible for acquisition, which just typically means that I go out and dig around these archives, right, and find these valuable genealogical records that we then work in conjunction with those institutions to get them digitized and published online, make them more accessible, and give back to the archive these digital copies. And so that's kind of where we're at. My colleague here, I'd like to introduce just briefly, is Jason Reeve. And Jason is responsible for Australia and New Zealand in that effort as well. And so he's kind of new. He's a great part of Ancestry who represents the company extremely well. And some of you may get to know him a little more. You'll see his face around the block as we continue our efforts here and abroad as well. So I just kind of want to share with you a little bit about Ancestry. Some of you may not know who we are a little bit, but obviously we're a company that produces or provides access for family history research, and we do that through our mantra, which is to discover, preserve, and share that heritage. Right? We're involved in the discovery part, so we produce those documents that help people discover about their ancestors, about who they are, and we'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to give you a brief overview with some highlights of some statistics associated with Ancestry, so you can get an idea of the company in general. Let me see if I get this correct. No. One more. We're a technology company, but that doesn't mean I'm technology-minded, right?
You don't need to.
No. That's why I'm in acquisitions and not IT. So let me tell you a little bit about the company. We've been around for 20, 30 years. More recently, heavily involved in what I've just described. So we have roughly 18 billion records online. Doing the math, it's typically around 2 million records are added each day to our site from around the world. We have records of representing about 80 countries, and people go on there, create trees, right? They're family trees, and we have about 80 million of those. And the connections, we have about 8 billion connections, which means people are connecting to each other, to trees, and to the information we provide, about 8 billion. We're a subscription-based for-profit company, and that's part of the reason we can do what we can do, right, with the funds that we collect through subscriptions. And we have about 2.4 million subscribers currently. As far as searches on our site, 75 million searches a day, typically, right? You can imagine the power of the searching that we have to accommodate on Ancestry when we have to do 75 million searches a day, and that's across all of the different types of collections we have. We have mobile apps as well, and there's been about 13 million downloads of that. Recently, in the last few years, we've branched out into DNA, which some of you, after speaking with some of you at our booth, are familiar with, and some of you may not be as familiar with. But DNA is another point of entry into this family history space, right? It's typically we find the younger generations are very excited about this, and it's encouraging them to explore a little bit more about their family history, right? Typically our typical users a little more older, and the DNA product has really encouraged the younger generations to have a cool experience, right, of that discovery, right, and learning about identity and things like that, which is typically a fairly kind of important topic that people are kind of talking about. I'd like to show a brief video that describes a little bit about the power of that product, and I'll tie it back here in a sec. So, do I press enter? That one there.
I'm proud to be English. My family have served and we've defended this country and we've been to war for this country.
I'm really patriotic about Bangladesh.
Well, I am 100% Icelandic, yeah, definitely.
This is a Kurdish wedding with my mom in the traditional Kurdish clothes.
We're just proud black, so that's it.
Yeah, I think we are probably the best country in the world, if I'm honest.
Think about other countries and other nationalities in the world. Are there any that you don't feel you get on with well, or you won't like particularly?
Germany. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the Germans.
You might think they're a little bit.
Particularly India and Pakistan, probably because of the whole You know, the conflict.
Because I have this side of me that's like, that hates Turkish people. Not people, but the government.
But French?
Nah.
We're just the best, you know, it's just fact.
I'm more important than you. I don't know you, but in my opinion, I am strong and I am more important than a lot of people.
How would you feel about taking a journey based on your DNA?
Yeah, I feel very intrigued.
What could you possibly tell me that I don't know?
So do you know how DNA works? So you get half from mum and half from dad, so 50% from each of them, and they get 50% from their parents, and back and back and back. And all those little bits of your ancestor, they filter down to make you, you. I need you to spit in this tube for me. You spit up to the little black line.
That's a lot of spit.
Right, the story of you is in that tube. What's it gonna tell me?
It's gonna be, oh yeah, you're French, and wait, your grandparents are French, and wait.
100% Bengali.
Solid Iraqi.
I'm Cuban.
You're gonna tell me that I'm English, like I've told you.
Jay, can you come down and join us?
I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say.
So you ready to find out your results? Will you read it out to us, please?
Wow, look at me.
Oh my god. Oh, wow. Shit, I didn't expect that.
All of them.
Whoa! No.
Caucasus, which was Turkish?
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece.
I'm 32% British.
What?
Great Britain, 30%. Can we 5% German?
I'm Irish.
Yeah.
So I'm a Muslim Jew.
Great Britain, 11%. You sure these results are mine?
Eastern Europe?
Iceland has definitely moved closer to Europe now.
I'm gonna go a bit far right now, but this should be compulsory. There would be no such thing as like extremism in the world if people knew their heritage like that. Like, who would be stupid enough to think of such thing as like a pure race?
In a way, we're all kind of cousins, in a broad sense. In a much more direct sense, you have a cousin in this room. Turn around and guess who it is. Wash?
Yeah. What's that?
Why don't you come down here and meet your cousin?
God, this is our best.
Did you know that?
I didn't know I did. This is like, my heart's pounding right now, I swear to God. We met.
I'm Jay from everywhere by the reason this.
I'm a real man of the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
So would you like to travel to all of these places?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I wonder how many of you are my cousins. I think that video captures part of why it is we do what we do, right? It's helping people to discover who they are. The DNA part does that fairly quickly on a high level, but the records we try and acquire and provide to people are just as important. Whether it's a spitting in a tube or looking at your great-grandfather's birth certificate has a similar effect of knowing who we are, and that past has a tremendous effect on people's attitudes. And I think as a company, that's kind of, we call these the aha moments, right? That we're trying to have people discover because of the power we feel that can have on a person's life. And so we continue to strive to fulfill that mission of discovering, preserving, and sharing. And the archive community is an integral part of our ability to do that, right? Once these young people have this experience, we're seeing more and more of them coming through into the general Ancestry site to figure out the details now, right? To find those pieces of evidence. And that's where the archive community comes in, and why we're so dedicated to supporting and continuing that support with that community throughout the world. And once again, I'd like to thank ACA for allowing us this brief time to share with you a little bit about who we are and why we do what we do. Thank you.
I guess, does anyone have any questions for Jared? It's a bit impromptu, but if anything, you'd like to say anything now. Otherwise, Jason will be up in the trade stall. Oh, there, Janet's got a question, so are you happy to answer? There's Alvin. Janet's just there. No. We don't have the mics. Oh.
Be easy on me, Janet.
This is not my question, but someone else's idea. What happens to the DNA? What do you do with it?
We have these big buckets back at the office.
I mean, seriously.
Seriously, no. We have the DNA is kept. We keep the DNA on file for the reasons as the product continues to develop. Right, we can go back and do more and more testing. Now, there is an opportunity if there's a concern that you want that destroyed. There's an avenue for that, right? If your concern is, look, I'd like to take the test, but I don't want some institution keeping my DNA, then either don't take the test, or you can. There's a pathway to having that destroyed. Most people are okay once they've taken that test to say, hey, I'm okay with this. Right? There's no association directly with you, if that makes any sense. It's hard to say that when you're talking about DNA, but we don't know. We don't know the name behind that, right? You register, and you can register anonymously or whatever you want to do, like that. So there's ways to have that test destroyed if that's what you'd like. Most people we find don't, and they're quite happy to have that because they understand that. DNA is moving down this path, and we want to be able to increase the products that we potentially provide to those people who are interested in sharing those results. And we've spoken with a couple of people about the ethnicity. It talks about the ethnicity, which you see there, right? But more importantly, from a family history standpoint, it shares we have over 2 million people have taken the test, and so what it does, it says, well, how am I related to all of those other over 2 million people, and that's where we have these cousin matches, right? There's a lot of different avenues you can go with that, but I appreciate the question, and so we get that frequently, but there is a path to destroying that if you need to.
One more quick question, thanks.
Sorry, I don't normally talk in big forums like this. I just wanted to point out to everybody here that as much as I don't want to be disrespectful to what you're saying, Ancestry's genetics tests don't actually do exactly what you've described them as doing. They show probabilities based on ethnic profiling, which isn't necessarily mean that those people of those ethnicities will actually be in that profiling. So I just think there's a lot of hype around this, so before everybody in the room thinks that it's actually a correct test,
and
I just want to say that
no, I understand.
There's a lot of murkiness around it. So.
And that's why we call it an estimate, right? It's based off of the geographical regions that we've been able to acquire these comparisons against. As that increases, those estimates become more and more accurate. But that's why we call it an estimate sort of thing. So.
Thank you, Jared. If you'd like to join me in thanking Jared and Ancestry for being our sponsor. I should point out tomorrow, I don't know if you realise, there's a session that the South Australian Museum are holding in the Macquarie Room on, it's called Science and Archives, but it's looking at DNA and Aboriginal communities. So I'm sure that will be a most interesting session. All right, now we move on to the Loris Williams Memorial Lecture. So I'd like if the members of that panel could come up, and then Robin. Might need those mics back here for the panel, and
I won't be long.
All right. Now, so I'll introduce, I think I might introduce Robin Williams first, who's specially come down from Brisbane. Robin is Loris's baby sister. I was allowed to say that.
Yes, you're allowed to say that.
It's important to note. And she's representing the Williams family here. This is actually the 10th anniversary of the lecture. The first one was in 2006 at Port Macquarie. It's 11 years since Loris passed away, and we thought that given we were looking at the 20 years since the policy statement, it was also good to acknowledge 10 years of the Loris Williams Memorial Lecture, and I'm very grateful for Robin coming from Brisbane to perhaps give us a personal memory of Loris. Not everybody in the room had the great fortune to either hear or meet her. So it's lovely of Robin to come down and just give us a little tribute to Loris. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of whose land we meet this afternoon, and I thank them for allowing me to come in and talk. In many Aboriginal cultures, I do a lot of welcomes where I live in Brisbane, so it's part of a family thing that we do up home. And one of the reasons we do welcome to countries or acknowledgement to countries is to welcome people to wherever they are from and to your country. So it's an honour for me this afternoon to come and speak for my family. Yes, so for those of you that don't know us or our family, we're proud Mulunjali people, and as Mulunjali people we're part of the Yugambeh language region. And for those of you that live in Queensland or may not live in Queensland, as the majority of you don't, that goes from Beenleigh in the north to Tweed Heads in the south, out to Bow Desert and parts of Stradbroke Island. And I'm a proud Mulunjali woman through links on my father's side and a Birrigubba woman through links on my mum's side. So we know where our family is from. So thank goodness. Not many people had that opportunity. And I think that is one of the reasons why Loris actually went into becoming an archivist. Her role, I can tell you her full story. She started off in a bra factory in Brisbane making bras. She then went on to working for Telstra for many years, for nearly 25 years. And then she wanted a career change, and she came across this course called archiving, and we all just said, well, what's that? And so she was able to explain to us what archiving was all about. And I can remember seeing Loris in the early hours of the morning, because she did it by correspondence with the university in WA. And I can remember waking up, at odd hours of the morning, 3, 4 o'clock, and there's Loris at the computer doing her assignments. She said, it's the best part of the day to do it. I can think clearly. And then she went off to work happily to do what she loved doing the most, and that was helping Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Queensland to find out about their families. So we're very proud of our sister to be able to do that, and a couple of the outcomes of that is that Loris now has like this scholarship, which is great. She has a room named after her at the State Library in Queensland as well. So, you know, from humble beginnings, Loris has made a few changes, and with this scholarship, you know, we're pleased to say that the young people who are doing these scholarships, I think it's great. We need more of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out there learning about our people, because it's nice to be able to walk into a room and to talk to an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, you know, about our history. I mean, I thank each and every one of you for the job that you do, but it's nice when you can talk to another Murray, which is a Queenslander, or a Koori, or whoever. It's just that, just gives you that little bit of more inner feeling, I suppose. But the job that you guys do, it's just fantastic. I mean, I would never ever thought about going into any history of any sorts. You know, who'd want to? I mean, we never used to listen to my father when he told us history, so why would you want to read about it and learn even more? But no, I think it's great, and, you know, thank you very much for what you do. Thank you to the Archivists Society for inviting me to come along. Loris would be very proud. My parents would be extra proud. And to Julie, who actually got the scholarship this year, it's great to know that person, because Julie actually just lives down the road from me, but I didn't know that she applied for this scholarship. We bumped into each other at bingo, and well, I thought I'd throw that in, and she told me, oh, guess what, I got the Loris Williams scholarship. I said, well, that's fantastic. It's nice to know who gets the scholarship, and hopefully that you can learn from this journey, Julie. And I know each and everyone else who has done it, I'm sure they have learnt too. So I won't gamble, I wish I could. I won't ramble on anymore. So thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck with everything in the future, everybody. So great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. All right, so now I've been delegated the duty of introducing everyone. And on Nathan, I cannot believe it. I have been so carefully making sure that your name is not Sentence, which is obviously the word correct. It's Sentence. So I'm really sorry. I was, what? What's that? Who did that? Oh, it's me. Oh, well, never mind. So Nathan Sentence and Kirsten Thorpe are from the Indigenous Services branch of the State Library in New South Wales. Hope I got that right. And they are actually the sponsors of today's session, so thank you to the State Library. Now they will be moderating the panel session, which is on 20 years, beyond access, 20 years of the policy statement, the ASA's policy statement on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander records. Now, I should note that the reason Kirsten and ISIG, this lecture is normally sponsored by ISIG. I would like to announce that at the ISIG meeting, a very good meeting yesterday, the decision was made to change the name of the SIG from Indigenous Issues to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander SIG. So, now, it hasn't been ratified by Council yet. I'm sure Council will be happy to ratify that change. And so actually, Kirsten is the convener of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander SIG. I'm not going to do it. ATSI SIG. So welcome to you both. Now, I'll go through because I've got to do it this way. Here we are. So, sorry, bear with me. I want to find Tiffany. I don't know if I had. Well, Tiffany McComsey is the chair of the Kinchela Boys, CEO of the Kinchela Boys Home. Is that right? Is that yeah? I'm sorry, I'm completely unprepared. I don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, where's the website? Where's my program? Here, this is what I need. Tiffany, welcome. Narissa Timbury was last year's Loris Williams scholarship holder and is a PhD student at Monash. Linden Orman Parker is a scholarship fellow at University of Melbourne. And Shannon Forkhead is also at Monash and is the, this is because I got given this. What was that? The Finkel Fellow. Oh, there we are. So that's my slightly ramshackle introduction to everybody. But I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating panel and I'll let you get on with it, okay?
Thanks, Julia. I actually asked Julia to do that so that I could get my head around moderating, so I apologise for throwing you in to do that. We're going to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves. We've got a lot of time this afternoon and we're hoping for some great discussion. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet, and I'm going to put this up while I talk. The Darug people, and thank Bruce for his welcome this morning. I'd also really like to thank Robin. Loris was very dear to us, and a little bit of what I'll be doing this afternoon is setting the scene for this panel session and giving those of you who may not have been with the profession over those last 20 years a little bit of background of Loris's contribution and some of the work of the SIG, and I guess where that's fitting into some bigger picture issues within the profession. Nathan and I are going to share this little bit in the beginning, but I wanted to introduce myself. Julia's mentioned that I'm the current convener of the Indigenous Issues, soon to be changed to the ATSI-SIG, so we have another acronym. I'm manager of Indigenous Services at the State Library of New South Wales, but my family are Warramai people from Port Stephens. So for those of you that ever have the good fortune of visiting Port Stephens, Hawk's Nest, Tea Gardens, that area, that's where my mother's side of the family come from. What we're doing today is really reflecting on the 20 years since the ASA policy statement, and a lot has been done. As I mentioned, we're going to set that scene. We're going to talk about the policy statement. Nathan's actually going to read some of it out for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it. Our panel speakers, Dr. Tiffany McComsey is going to start with a presentation, and we need to quickly put the USB in a moment. And then we're going to go along to each of our speakers and get their insight, and then really open up the session for your feedback and for some discussion, and I might call Julia back up at that point as well. I'm going to get Nathan to introduce himself now and have a look at the statement.
Hello, I'm Linden Sentence. I also work in the Indigenous Services branch. I work as a library technician. I'm a Wiradjuri man. My family's from the Wellington Dubbo region, and I'm a descendant of Diana Mudgee. I'm currently studying by correspondence at Charles Sturt University, and I was the 2015 co-recipient of the Loris Williams Scholarship with Narissa. I think the scholarship is a great initiative to help Aboriginal archival students like myself feel more included and supported by the profession, and just connects us to the profession and helps us follow our passion of archives and archive study. I'm going to read the policy statement. I'm going to kind of read it word for word, but it is available, if you don't listen to me properly, it is available online for you to check out. All right. Archives and archivists in Australia have a vital role to play in assisting the process of reconciliation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Many of the records for which archives and archivists in Australia are responsible have the potential, depending upon how they are used, to greatly assist or greatly hinder the process of reconciliation. Most of these records were not created by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is regarded. They may, however, contain information which is not known to Aboriginal people, which is regarded as secret or sacred by them, or which is presented in a manner which is offensive to them. Archives and archivists need to be sensitive to those issues and to institute access policies which take into account the concerns and moral rights of Aboriginal people. Notwithstanding the insensitive or inappropriate manner in which many archival records relating to Aboriginal Australians were created, or the offensive nature of many of the representations of Aboriginal people in these records, the network of Australian archives nevertheless contains an unparalleled storehouse of recorded knowledge relating to such matters as Aboriginal customs, traditions, genealogies, and the experience of the European invasion and imposition of foreign laws and administrative systems. Much of this information, which exists in written form amongst archival records, has lost to the oral tradition and memory of Aboriginal people, or was deliberately kept from them. Archives have the opportunity and responsibility to assist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to make the maximum use of archival holdings and services to facilitate Aboriginal access to records of their own cultural heritage and historic experience. To assist the process of archives, and archivists need to design and implement service environments, systems, routines, finding aids, and the promotional material which do not discomfort or embarrass Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander users, but which make appropriate access to records a culturally sensitive, welcoming, relatively stress-free experience for Aboriginal Australians. The ASA believes that none of this can be adequately achieved unless archives and archivists in Australia establish meaningful links with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. This should be done not only by the use of appropriate consultative liaison mechanisms, but also by facilitating the active participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in archival planning and decision-making processes, in the routine operation of archival institutions at various levels. In particular, archives and archivists in Australia should be encouraged to employ, train and educate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff to help them pursue fulfilling careers in archives. Cross-cultural awareness programs should be implemented which promote an appreciation of amongst non-Aboriginal staff of the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and culture. The ASA endorses the principles and guidelines set out in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander protocols for libraries, archives and information services, which were developed by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Library and Information Research Network and published in 1995. ASA members are encouraged to become familiar with these protocols and support their information in archives in which they are employed. Back to Kirsten.
I thought I'd just ask, can you raise your hands if you knew about the policy statement? For those of you, there's some of you who worked on it. Okay. So probably a third of the room. So it's great that we're having this conversation. I think, when I hear the statement, and for those of you who were exposed to it or maybe not, it's good to ponder its relevance, and I guess that's a part of the discussion that we want to have later on. Okay, so we've gone through the policy statement, but I guess what I wanted to do was also introduce the work of the Indigenous issues, now to be known as the ATSI-SIG, and to give a little bit of insight about the work that was happening to coincide with this statement happening. Nathan mentioned in reading the policy statement, the ATSI protocols, which were developed by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Library and Information Resource Network, which were really quite groundbreaking in the mid-1990s in bringing awareness of Indigenous issues. And I really think at that time that had an impact on the profession. The ISIG, as it says here, interestingly was previously known as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander SIG, and then changed to Indigenous. And one of the things that we were discussing yesterday with the changes of the SIG was our need to remove the issues from any discussion that's happening about Indigenous people. And I think in reflecting on 20 years, it's time for us to be, we had a kind of roundtable moment of would it be Indigenous initiatives, but really we wanted to take that negative connotation away from Indigenous projects. So Robin has also mentioned the work that happened in acknowledging Loris, and I guess I wanted to just give some really brief insight into that time in developing an awareness around Indigenous people being in the profession. There's a couple of people in the room that were really helped facilitate conversation. I'm going to mention Jill Caldwell as a particular person that contributed to this brochure being produced, I think around the time of Loris's passing, 2004, 2005. And all of the people that were listed here, Phyllis Williams from National Archives in Darwin, Loris, myself, Andrew Wilson, of course, from State Records in South Australia, and Simon Flagg. There are a few others that really helped us to try and bring light on, the importance of Indigenous people being employed in archives and with archives and records. We know in looking back at the our history of the distribution of this brochure that we probably circulated it widely from 2004 to 2007, but we stopped with that project since then. As I mentioned, a very active time. Robin has mentioned the scholarships that were offered. There's been 9 to date that really promote Aboriginal people being employed from the vet sector through, in the case of Narissa, who will be speaking, to PhD level. And to contextualise that, I think it's important for people to be aware of some of the government initiatives that were around at that time. So the archives profession were very heavily influenced by reports like the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. Some groundbreaking recommendations were made in that report that are still highly relevant for Aboriginal people to have a sense of identity, to understand the records that related to their past. And of course, the following report, and I think that's really, my cadetship and my entry into the profession was recognising that more Indigenous archivists were needed after the Bringing Them Home report was circulated. So really significant moments that led to changes in the information profession. I also wanted to mention, in the time that we're reflecting back on these 20 years, the impact of research in this area, and I guess the opportunities that were taken with research, and to make special note of the Monash University project Trust and Technology that went from 2003 to 2008. The Monash report and the research that was done was an actual collaboration with ISIG, which was really wonderful to have the profession working with researchers. And I guess it's looking in the space of how Indigenous research methodologies can actually impact some of the research methods in the archives profession. I'm not going to read them all here, but I'd really encourage people, and I hope for those of you that were around during this time can go back to these set of principles, because I think we need to consider them in light of the ASA policy statement. A lot of this work was around the recognition of rights in records, and I know Tiffany will definitely be mentioning this in terms of the Kinchela Boys. Something that I'm very interested in is the adoption of holistic community-based archives and the whole area of challenging official records. So I'd love some lively debate about this at the end. We've posed some questions to the panel. I'm going to hand over to them in a moment. We're going to have a fairly democratic process with this, but try and keep to some time. Tiffany's going to present first and introduce the Kinchela Boys. But I just wanted to leave one quote. Rebecca Bateman, wherever you are in the room, I asked the members of the SIG how far they had, thought would come in 20 years with the ASA policy statement. And I loved Rebecca's sentiment in this, because I think that as a profession we have done some wonderful work, and it's groundbreaking work internationally. But for today to be a call to action of what do we want to do next, and what do we want to do next together. So that's it from me, and I'm going to hand over to Tiffany, if we can hopefully get the USB in to start the conversation.
With Aboriginal people and archives. Because I'd come from the education field, there was heaps of information, and I knew who was who kind of thing, and I was taken aback because there was the odd article in journals, and I'd be like, oh, there's not much written. And so I would speak with my lecturer, Sue, and ask, what things had been done. And then my mentor at the time was Jill Colborough, and she'd started working on a database of initiatives that archival agencies had done with Aboriginal communities. And so I was really fortunate to be able to build on that for my studies. And my whole master's was awesome because it allowed me to follow my path and my dream while at the same time learning about the discipline and archival science and everything. So it was just my assignments could focus on what I was going to do when I finished. How could I work with communities and help Aboriginal people access their records? So building on that database with Jill was wonderful, but what I found through that research and finding the documents and talking with people was, while all these wonderful initiatives were written down, the actual process, like you were talking about, the processes people got to come up with those initiatives, or how it kind of all worked out, that wasn't really written about. So I could read the finding aids and stuff, but yeah, there wasn't much deeper level stuff. So anyway, then I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship from the Outer Foundation to do my PhD, and that's allowing me to look further, and in part of my literature review was looking at, you know, more literature that the profession has put out. And sadly for me, there wasn't a great increase in stuff that's been written about. So yes, there's been wonderful projects have happened. I still would have hoped that maybe I had more Aboriginal colleagues working with me by that time. So yeah, so I guess maybe, yeah, for me, I didn't find as much information as I would have liked to showcase in different things.
Thanks, Nerissa.
Hello? Question 2 is to the panel. What do you think prohibits Aboriginal Australians from accessing records relating to them and their family?
I really want to stand at the podium. Is that all right? Anyway, I'm Linden. I can talk about this subject for a long time. So I guess going back to a little bit about my journey in archives, I've worked in archives for a number of years. Since 1996, I used to work for an organisation called FARA, the Foundation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research Action, and used to do research in museums right across Australia, documenting and cataloguing our ancestral remains, with a view to repatriation of our human remains in collections not only in Australia but overseas. And I was really shocked when I wrote to lots of institutions in Australia about the lack of ability to allow access to records. So most museums eventually came round to the position that they should allow Aboriginal people and researchers into the records to look at their human remains collections. Funnily enough, the University of Adelaide Anatomy Department was probably one of the most recalcitrant in Australia, and they still are not very open about their collections, as far as I'm aware. So it was quite interesting to get a range of responses. We did this research also in the UK, of which Cambridge University was probably the worst. It's particularly not the anatomy department, but the osteoarchaeology, the Duckworth collection. So it's quite interesting to get this range of responses. But funnily enough, Cambridge University, after 20 years, have now returned one individual that was collected, sent to Cambridge in 1925 on the basis that it was illegally exported from Australia. So the family members went over last week, and you may have seen the repatriation in London. Birmingham University repatriated about 8 remains from their collection that we don't know where they came from. So archives, I've had a sort of terrible relationship. One of my first articles I wrote in the Aboriginal Law Bulletin was information, what was it called? Something like Access Archives, whose information is it anyway? So you can probably Google that. And that sort of outlined the process that, as an Aboriginal organisation and person, the sort of troubles that we were having gaining access to materials and information. We also had an issue around that. Is Phyllis Williams around? Is she here at all? No. So Phyllis was a great help for my family. My grandmother had, her first 2 children were removed, and we know that they were in Sydney. So we spent many years trying to track them down. So we went through many archives, and it was the Stolen Generation mob based in the Blue Mountains that eventually found my grandmother's first 2 children. Unfortunately, my mother had passed away and my grandmother in 1999 within the space of 6 months of each other. And I got a call in London from the link-up service about a month after my grandmother died and had tracked down my uncle and aunt. in Sydney, only because the person at the Lincoln office had remembered my story, and when my uncle rang them and told him his story, made the connection. And it wasn't actually the archival record, it was the individual that was in that. And I'd love to know who it was, because I have lost touch with the link-up service there. But it was his fantastic memory that linked our family together. So I ended up meeting my uncle. My aunt had actually passed away, but we have 3 cousins, but we've never been able to track them down in Sydney, so that's something else. So the archives are, you know, this rich tapestry for Aboriginal people of sadness, of joy, of struggle, you know, fighting with bureaucracy and people's policies around what information they'll let Aboriginal people have and access. So I think reflecting back on the statement, I was telling people today, it was a fantastic statement at the time actually, and it was brilliant and it's highly relevant today. But what I'd like to see from the statement is that some sort of form of action associated with that from the Australian Society of Archivists. And so that might take the form of a reconciliation action plan, which a lot of corporations and companies and governments now have. And how can you as a society actually start to implement some of these policies, or at least advise your members on what are the practical things that you can do to assist in the reconciliation process. One thing that you could possibly do to assist in the reconciliation process is advise your members of the government's new procurement policy when it comes to Indigenous services. So that's a really practical way that you can do it. So you might say to your organisation, oh, we're having a morning tea, let's actually get in some Aboriginal caterers, or let's have a look at the Commonwealth government's launched it was the Commonwealth Government Indigenous Employment Strategy and Policy. So they've set targets in the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory Government has set a target of 30% in their agencies of Indigenous employment, which is population parity. So it's probably one of the best Indigenous employment strategies in the country. And the Commonwealth have set targets of 3% and the rest. So, you know, National Archives and others could have a look at the government's policy and see how you're going to meet that, and employ and engage Aboriginal people in the profession as well. Anyway, shall we keep talking? Or? No.
Thanks, Linden. I might ask Shannon the same question. Your reflection on the policy statement, and I guess what are some of the challenges that still exist?
Okay. With the policy statement, I think it very much is an indication of where Australia was and where possibly the society was back in 1996. Just had found that whilst these institutions were looking at ways of engaging with communities, and all of a sudden through government reports they had this huge community made up of a whole lot of communities across Australia wanting access to records. And I think that's where that policy statement has come from. I think it's become, as I hope the profession has developed and the institutions developed, that's changed over time, and I think we do need to revisit it. And not just the policy statement itself, but look at other documents that are around that could actually assist, as Kirsten put up before, the principles, and also the RAP as you've suggested, Linden. But also, I think it's time to actually have a bit more of a look at not just the Indigenous community, but also the profession. This statement seems to be very much about the community, and I think it needs a bit more work to move forward together, if that makes sense.
So, Julia, we've thrown up a few statements and shown some background, but we'd actually like to have a conversation with you now and maybe ask some questions, or have some people in the room give their perspective as part of this plenary about what are some of the critical issues, what should we celebrate, what's our call to action, what will our next 20 years look like, or will we be sitting here in 20 years having similar conversations and similar discussions. So Julia, we might run around with the microphones. Do we have more?
Oh, pretty sure there were 4 ordered. Let me see, we've got one up there. Okay, well, that'll do. We can take maybe one from the panel here, Alvin. Thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to now ask for some questions. Now, I know some of you have worked in this area and you still continue and might well have some reflections yourself on changes over the past 20 years. I guess what prompted this, as Kirsten said, was really thinking, have the needs changed over 20 years? Does the statement stand up? Whether or not we've met some of the aspirations within the statement is perhaps another question, but, has the community's needs changed? Have archival institutions changed over 20 years? And I know you work in these areas, some of you, so it'd be great if you could reflect. So show of hands for questions. Anybody? Janet, thank you.
Janet Howes from the Assistance of Charity Congregational Archives. I was just wondering, how do we know where records are, particularly in smaller organisations? Now, I feel very embarrassed to say that we have records relating to Indigenous people in our archives, but how do we actually get that information out there in a meaningful way from across the board, from a whole lot of archives to the Indigenous communities? I mean, what's kind of a mechanism? What would be a good way to do that, do you think?
Yeah, so you might reflect.
I'm talking a lot about non-government archives.
Oh my God, I've got a hole on the speech for this one. So, I work in a remote community called Port Keats or Wadda in the Northern Territory, and I think some of you may have seen my little video 3 years ago looking at their audiovisual archive. And what I found was, and I sort of put a bit of a call out to volunteers or archivists, one of the things that as a society that you could do is have a program where you assist community-based archives, whether they're Indigenous archives or they're organisations that have a small amount of archives as they relate to Indigenous people in this country. So, and you may have a little digitisation program, for instance, and then work with volunteers that are going to help, make that information available to the Aboriginal community in a sensitive way and a way that you can use people to help index things. So I know that we've found a lot of records from my family, from the Northern Territory through the Rankin River police journals, but we had a retired policeman that was just mad. I don't know if anyone's from the Northern Territory that can remember his name, was mad and indexed all of the names, and every time there was someone mentioned in the Rankin River journals. So we had massive amount of lists so families could go in and find their relatives as they were mentioned in these journals. So that's, one way is to set up a program, digitise your records, but also, look for volunteers to do this. But I'd like to see an outreach back to community-based archives. So one of the things that we worked with was with IRCA, with the Indigenous Remote Communications Association. As we were digitising the audio-visual collection, we realised that there's no national standards per se or a community-based guide for how to look after your audio-visual collections. There have been ones done in the past, but as technology moves on, and it moves quite rapidly, that it changes. So with hopefully IATSIS and the National Film and Sound Archive and the Northern Territory Libraries are a great supporter. We've developed a community-based guide for organisations to digitise their archives as it relates to audio-visual archives. So there's little things like that that are really practical for people to do. And I'm sure, you guys possibly have things like that when it comes to photographic and document archives, how-to guide for community-based organisations. Did that answer your question? No. Yeah.
I think what Janet's asking is, if we, as an archivist in a small community archive
Yep.
or a non-government archive,
Yep.
know we have records,
Yep.
how can we, without digitising, how
Yep.
can we best let you know that those records exist? Would it be a good idea, for example, to send an index of what we might hold to Kristen?
Yeah, absolutely.
So she could say, okay, this particular archive might have records relating to your family from this particular area. I think that's what you meant, wasn't it?
Yeah. Where's your archive based from? New South Wales, isn't it? Or?
New South Wales, but we also cover Hobart.
Yeah.
But one of the other big issues is photographs of unidentified children.
Yeah.
And so, what do we do with those?
So,
how do we make those accessible? How do we get
and letting people know, like the New South Wales Land Council, the local land councils, and
I was
others.
Just wondering whether we could develop a strategy for some sort of across
a good call to action.
Sort of
action one. I think that what we've
to do it consistently. So that you don't just sort of have people all over the place, but we've got some sort of I don't know. This is just off the top of my head.
We've heard from Tiffany the continued challenges of people trying to identify information, and really that's something that we need to have a response to. And I think that the role of the Indigenous Issues SIG is to support, whether it's if we conduct another survey of records, so we have an opportunity for people to get back to us. I think it's a great idea, but we need to know that stuff because people are still searching and are traumatised from that process.
And stolen generation organisations, like the Link Up service that's based in the Blue Mountains, just letting them know we've got these records, your clients may be interested, and they might add that to an index of archives that people can search. And Trove, get it out on, get your archive at least mentioned and have a link to Trove so they can suck up the information that you may or may not have.
Hi.
And anyone else that wants, I've seen nods there, want to respond to that question as well.
I just wanted, my name's Tracy Bradford. I've in previous lives worked as the manager of the Family Records Unit, New South Wales Department of Aboriginal Affairs. I think what Janet's question has prompted me, and it links with what Tiffany mentioned at the beginning, is it comes back to one of the recommendations in the Bringing Them Home report about a one-stop shop sort of concept. I don't think we've really progressed on that sort of recommendation out of the Bringing Them Home report. And perhaps there's, I don't know who's going to do it, because there's obviously always resourcing issues about who has the capacity to coordinate all of this stuff. But Janet's sort of question about how do we tap into this also reminded me of a project that I was involved with at DOCS in the late 1990s, which was the Connecting Kin project, and a lot of the content of that was sourced because we actually thought about which government and non-government organisations keep records and then contacted them directly and then sort of drilled down into what their holdings were, and it was a bit of word of mouth about who else should we ask, and that sort of network of contacts sort of led us to develop a resource which I think is still sort of being used today, but a lot of the content in that then underpinned the Find and Connect website. And I know it's a slightly different project. It's not just about Aboriginal records and Torres Strait Islander records, but that approach about asking, knocking on doors, getting referrals, building a database of knowledge, I think is something that could still be a valid model to follow. But the one-stop shop concept, I think, is something we need to revisit. But who's going to resource it? Who's going to host it? Who's going to fund it?
Yeah, I mean, just on that, it is, there have been a lot of indexing projects, and increasingly so, and one wonders if the digitised world improves or doesn't. I mean, it allows records to be digitised and sent back to communities directly and then managed within that community as that community sees appropriate. But so that, there has been a lot of information collected about communities and the records over the 20 years. Has it delivered, do we think? This is it's really interesting because I know there's been a lot of work, but is it still meeting those needs? Because a lot of communities still argue all the time. They didn't know that those records were still in those institutions. It's a hard problem, even with a lot of work over 20 years.
Oh, look, we've had discussions about, like, digitisation is one avenue. At the Centre for Organisational and Social Informatics at Monash, we've talked about and looked at, I think we actually put an application at one stage for a gateway where you could actually connect smaller archives, not necessarily having the records digitised and put up there, but maybe even just a statement saying, we have this collection, it's available if people are looking for information about this, because I think it's been pointed out by a number of the speakers on the panel that sometimes it is like a jigsaw trying to find the records, and what we're talking about isn't just about finding necessarily family or where you came from, but also that cultural knowledge that it connects people back to country, and also the language that could actually provide the information to help them continue on that country. So I don't know if there is an answer yet, but I think Kirsten's right that it is something that should be a call to action, is to look at those. You know, maybe we need to look at those documents again in conjunction with the policy statement.
Mel, over there. I don't have the mic. Hilary.
Sorry, Lucy just wants to...
I just wanted to mention that there are a number of initiatives around the place, and in fact the publication that National Archives was involved in, Tracking Family, which got an award in the Amanda Jones. That was a publication where we got information about all the records about Northern Territory Aboriginal people. We approached a whole lot of organisations that non-government, so it started out from a couple of seminars in Darwin and Alice Springs in the first edition, and we got together the churches, genealogical societies, government agencies, the libraries, archives, and we got everybody to tell us what records they held, and it was like a directory to the institutions. We also included people like the Mitchell Library, South Australian Museum, South Australian Library, and we just did the new edition last year. Now, that covers the Northern Territory, and we tried to cover children who were moved from the Territory interstate, like during the war. So that was an attempt, because there wasn't anything like that in the Northern Territory. This directory was supposed to assist with that. And it has been, and we gave copies to all the link-ups, free to all the link-ups in the state libraries, and our Aboriginal Advisory Group in the Northern Territory was closely associated with the development of it. And it has been distributed through the Northern Territory community with that. There are some other directories of that sort in states, like there was one done some time ago which in Western Australia. There's Connecting Kin, and there are some other things. Another site that is very useful is the IATSIS Family History website, and they have tried to draw together as many different information about as many different institutions that have records in different places. So while I accept that there is a lot to be done, there is some work that can be built on, and it would probably be useful as a start to get together a list of all those different sites, and a lot of them are online, and get together those as a starting point so people know that they exist, and then people will be able to work out whether we start another website or some way of drawing together that information and the work that's already been done by a number of people.
Thank you, Hilary. I think one of the questions that I have in knowing that all those resources are out there and hearing people like Tiffany who are on the front line and some of us who work with clients is, what is the impact of us doing this, and where are we heading in those next 20 years to actually do something that is transformational and perhaps more user-centred than, I know we've done a really great job in describing, but if you are not from an information field, how do you actually want to engage with that material in a way that makes sense to you, in your language, in your level of education, the place that you're from, what are we actually doing to edge to more of a network world rather than a one-stop shop? We now have technology that can bring us together rather than pointing people to the one place. So I'd welcome any feedback or comments on that.
I'd just like to say something from my perspective. I don't live down home with all my family, so when I'm at home I know everything, what's going on, blah, blah, whatever's happening. But where I live now, everything I know, unless I run into one of my mates, is from the Aboriginal Medical Service. I go to the doctors, I'm sitting there and I look on the board and, you know, anything that's happening is there, is listed. And I was just thinking, until your collections are added to finding aids and finding guides and things like that, you might be able to make links with the community who, if you know like where the records are from, just those initial links with, say if you don't know it's a bit hard, but you know, if there's an Aboriginal organisation, just to make links and say, look, we've got this, you know, collection here, we'd like to let the community know about it, and you know, just, well, that's how I find out what's happening in my community where I'm living now. It's, you know, in the newsletter, or it's on the, you know, they put up a little poster, but it's just a short-term thing, but it also builds connections with the local community who may be able to lead you on to who you need to speak to, whether that is ISIG or, you know, anyone.
Just wait for the mic. Robin, just get the mic so people can hear.
Where I live in Eagleby in Queensland, in Brisbane, we work a lot together in our communities, and for us to get to know each other, like the first thing an Aboriginal person does when they see another Aboriginal person is, who's your mob? That's how we get to know who we are, or you know, who our relatives are. But I was just listening to the lady up the back here. Maybe you can be involved in your little community might have like a reconciliation day, or you could celebrate it with your NAIDOC stuff and just say, oh look, we have this information, you know, and we can help, you know, in the celebration of, you know, with your NAIDOC, come along and see what we've got, and then, or maybe you can help us, you know, where do we go from here, and invite you guys out there for their NAIDOC day or the reconciliation. Utilise the celebrations that we have to find out more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people.
And the thing is, it's not to there's been a lot of work done in the past 20 years. We're not saying that at all. But we also know that these searches take a long time. I had a friend recently who was so excited because they finally found the last piece to a jigsaw puzzle that they'd been searching for 10 years. They finally found where this person had come from. It's not something that is easy, but if we've got a policy statement that can assist people in doing this, I think we should be able to, we should do it.
Sue?
Sue McCamish from Monash. In the research that we did in the Trust and Technology project, and that Shannon did as part of her PhD, what the Koori people who were talking to us about their needs told us, and mostly it was to do with records not so much still in community but records in institutional contexts, was that access is not enough, and being treated as users of the information with only limited rights in the records is not enough. The issue that's been raised about disclosure was a very significant issue that was highlighted by many people, that there should be a right to have records disclosed to communities if they exist in institutional places. The issue of being able to add their story to the records in institutional places was also highlighted by the people that we spoke to. And beyond that, the right to be involved in decisions that are made about the records, both historically and currently, because for many people they might have been put aside and archived in the National Archives or the State Archives or a library, but they believed that the records were their records. So that was the kind of thing that came through really strongly in the findings and led to the principles, which were principles relating to disclosure, principles relating to the need to have systems that enable people to add their story to the records. And I think in order for some of those things to happen, first of all, there needs to be strong partnerships built. And there are some partnerships and some wonderful examples of that, but we need to do that across the board. Because as Mick Gooder said, Indigenous people were once captives of the archive, which goes back to our colleague Four Miles' article about that. And then they've become passive subjects of the archives with very limited rights. But what needs to happen is for Indigenous people to become active participatory agents in record keeping and archiving. And that can only happen if we build much stronger partnerships and work out together how to address these issues.
And I don't know if you want to respond, but Cassie has a comment too. Do you want to respond now? Or?
I was going to say, Sue's completely correct. Like, my first experience with... my first experience with knowing that there was records was people coming into... When I worked for the Koori Heritage Trust, I had people coming in and going... Because I was the librarian, and they go, how can this person write this book about me? They don't know me, they don't know my family. Where have they found these records? Half of it's not true. And people have gone and done research into the archives and produced publications about families that these families didn't even know existed, that these stories were available. And the first thing they were saying was, well, we don't want them publicly available straight away. And this is, whilst digitisation is a great way for access, it's something that needs to be tempered a bit with what Sue was saying, that partnership and consultation and finding out, letting people know that those records exist and whether they do want them available to everybody or whether they want to be able to stagger it. One of my friends described it, she'd found a whole lot of records about her family, and her way of doing it was she wanted to talk to her immediate family first, then her extended family, then her community, as in the group that she came from. Then, if everyone was in agreement, then the wider community could have access to those records. But it was that making it a part of their story first before they made it a public story.
Cassie? Oh. Cassie?
Cassie Findlay. Well, I just wanted to bring it back to what the ASA membership and the ASA leadership can do, because we're all here in a room, and as Kirsten said, tangible kind of action-based stuff is really important to talk about. And I feel like the statement perhaps needs renewal in light of some of the things Sue was talking about and some of the projects that have happened in the intervening years, but also that there could be some work put together on a small number of quite specific, tangible things that members of the ASA, individual and corporate members, can do, and that could be socialised throughout the society. It doesn't have to be a giant, big, shiny new website or a big thing, but I've heard, like the idea about going to, celebrations in communities or going to events to talk about your holdings. I mean, there are, I'm sure, lots of other really great ideas, but I think maybe the ASA leadership could take something on board, perhaps along those lines.
Yes. Yeah.
Shannon Lovelady, Presbyterian Ladies College. Just wondering, can anyone tell me the status of Find and Connect? Is it stagnant at the moment? Has it been refunded?
Find and Connect?
Because it's a great resource, and I'm thinking...
There we go.
Great. I'm thinking we could perhaps use the Connect part of it rather than reinvent the wheel.
Hi everyone, I work on Find and Connect. I'm the project archivist on Find and Connect. Yay. We are funded currently until the middle of next year, and then we will have to do another bid for funding. We were originally funded only for forgotten Australians and for former child migrants. There has been requests from the government to possibly include more or highlight the information on there about the stolen generations, because there is a lot already embedded within the website, but it hasn't really been highlighted. However, when slight movements were started to be made in that area, we realised there's no advisory group for us with stolen generations on board in any format, because that was taken away when they decided that stolen generations wouldn't be part of Find and Connect. And we have made contact with Kirsten, and the Indigenous SIG in the hope that they'll be able to provide some guidance as to how we can best proceed with Find and Connect, and indeed the stolen generations content that we have on there. So.
Thanks, Nicola. Well, look, I'm just conscious of time, so perhaps some final remarks from the panel, yes? Well, Shannon, you might have given your final ones, but others may like to.
Look, I think obviously the discussion here is showing that there's people that are interested and people that do want not necessarily some direction, but possibly some advice and help. And as well as looking at the policy statement, maybe we need to actually look at providing a bit more information about resources if possible in the future. Some opportunity for ASA members to share resources.
I guess from my perspective and from the research that I've been really lucky to be able to do, it's also having conversations with people working in the field and the researching people like me about not just access, other aspects of archives, and and what that means to the communities and the people that I talk to. So I guess I think of having conversations like that. That's it, I guess.
I would just advocate to really do good community engagement. If there's anyone from IATSIS here, you have a great collection with the Dawn and New Dawn magazines, but it's become really user unfriendly for people coming into an organization like ours, trying to download the copies or access names. So things like that, when you're looking to digitalize collections, bring in potential users, and they'll tell you if it's hard or complicated. And it's also the fact that there are a lot of people who don't have access on a regular basis to the internet. It costs organizations like ours, which is a small not-for-profit in a community, to have constant access to the internet and to encourage community members to come to use ours. And then, of course, everyone wants to print out copies. So color printing is really expensive. And it's also, you have to make things accessible as paper copies and do the mail-outs. It's not enough to create, and I acknowledge the work that was done by bringing link-ups on board to create more collaborative resources, but they're still not reaching out enough to communities across the country.
Oh, okay. Well, next year at the conference, the theme is diversity, and the board has agreed that we're going to share some space at next year's conference with information technology and Indigenous communities, hosted by University of Melbourne. We had a conference about 8 years ago. But looking at the way technology is used by many Indigenous communities, talking about one of the other things that we'd like to do is hold a session around native title records as well, and land rights records, and maybe get some land councils down to talk about their archives and issues associated with that. They have the same problems. How do they make available all of the information that's been collected for native title claims available back to their constituents? So I'd like to give a little plug for that in University of Melbourne next year, and we can have a further discussion around these particular issues.
Nathan, is there anything that you wanted to add before I sum up? Okay. So thank you everyone for coming to this session. This is a a deep conversation in quite an unintimate space. So thank you for sticking around to the last moments of the session in the afternoon, and for sharing this time for us. I think we have a lot to celebrate, but in hearing some of the comments, we also have opportunities as a profession to really proudly move into the next 20 years doing some meaningful stuff with communities. And I think I really appreciate everyone's contribution to the panel, both as Indigenous people, but also as researchers and people that are really going out and advocating on the ground, being in between that interface between community, institutions and the profession. So I really thank you for your time today. And for Tiffany, please thank the Kinchela Boys for those conversations about Stolen Generation Group. There's a lot of people around in that network that we can all connect with and step outside and have those conversations. People are really keen and eager to be a part of a consultative process. I had a few things as the call to actions, and I guess in my role as the ISIG convener, I'm really happy for people to contact us and to start this new revived conversation about where we go to next and perhaps how we can review the policy statement. I think that, I heard from the group that idea around proactive disclosure. If there are institutions that have records, please let us know. I think that, we can find the solutions along the track, but even that awareness and building into the networks and relationships. Linden told his story of, making that connection through people, so that's really important. I think the message that I heard as well was about building partnerships, and it's really important that this doesn't become something for the Indigenous issues SIG to drive, but for the profession to drive, and hearing that idea that, between all of us we can start to make a contribution. The other thing that I heard was that we need to move beyond access, and this needs to be a deep commitment to managing records through systems in a way that give people voice, because that's something that's really lacking. And I really like the idea, Cassie, of the tangible actions. This doesn't have to be something that we build. I know in our work at the State Library, it is about some of those more iterative processes that we try and get on our long journey. And Professor Martin Nakata always tried to slow me down and said, Kirsten, this is a 25-year journey, so just take a breath. So I thank you all for your time. And again, thanks to the speakers and for Julia for helping us a bit there with the moderation. And enjoy your evening with dinner. Thank you.